Hello, thank you for watching and welcome to the third video in my series on using R for group insurance and employee benefits. Today I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about referring to and modifying data in R once you've already got a data file or a data frame in R. You may remember from the first couple of videos that we've been working with this hypothetical census file here for example, that might be with a life insurance RFP that has a few fields of information on it. So we're going to spend some time with the basic life amount and AD&D amount today. And the first thing I'd like to show you is, okay, once you've got this information in here, how do you actually access a field of information in case you wanted to do something with it? So the naming convention that you use to access data that's in a data frame is you type the name of the data frame, so in this case census, then a $sign, and then the name of the field. So if we type it down here, we do census, $sign, and RStudio is nice enough to pull up a list of the available fields. And let's look at the AD&D amount. So you can see that what this shows us is it shows us approximately the first 1,000 of them. In fact, it shows us the actual first 1,000. And you can see that almost all of the first 1,000 are 26,500. So this is nice to be able to see this, but it doesn't really give you a lot of information. I mean, you can see this, but the power of this is, and the reason why I wanted to show you this, is that with this one command, census $sign AD&D amount, we actually access every single one, all 92,448 values in that vector of data on the data frame. So let's do it again. If we wanted to look at the basic life amounts, we would type this command, census $sign basic life amount, and we can highlight that up here and hit run. And now here are the first 1,000 basic life amounts. And you can see that the first 1,000 of these, most of them are 43,000. So this vectorization concept is very powerful in R. With one reference, you can access thousands and thousands of pieces of information or data points. And once you've got those vectors and you understand how they work, you can actually do a lot with them. So for example, what if we wanted to see all of the ratios of the AD&D amount to the basic life amount? So in other words, what percentage of basic life do people have in AD&D? Well, the way we would do that is we would just reference each of these two vectors and we put a divide sign in between. So we're going to say census AD&D amount divided by census basic life amount. And if we run that, we can see all now the ratios of the AD&D amount to the basic life amount. And for the first 1,000 of them, they're mostly this 0.616 number, which is the 26,500, the most common AD&D amount, divided by the 43,000, the most common basic life amount. Well, once we've now got that vector of ratios, we can do something interesting with that. We can run the summary function on that vector of ratios and see a statistical summary of that. So the lowest or the minimum ratio is 0. So there's at least one person out there on the census who has 0 AD&D amount. They have something for basic life, but no AD&D. Then the first quartile or the 25th percentile of the ratio is a half. The median is this, ratio, this number we've been seeing, this 6163 number. The mean, the third quartile or the 75th percentile, the maximum, and two not applicables because there were two missing values on this file. So that's very useful to see this statistical summary of these ratios. And you can see how powerful this is. By just referring to the vectors, the field names, you can actually get some useful information out of this very, very quickly. So the second thing I want to show you today is how to create a new field on a data frame. It's very, very easy. Frequently in a life insurance type situation, you might have a need to model or see what it would look like if, for example, the AD&D amount were a different type or a different ratio of the basic life than what is currently in the case for the employer. So let's say, for example, we wanted to create a new AD&D field. We're going to call it AD&D amount alt for alternate. What if we wanted to create a new AD&D field equal to the basic life amount times 75% or 75% of the basic life amount? Well, this is actually very, very easy. we use this same naming convention, the data frame, $, and then we put in the new field name that we want to create, and then we assign it with this sort of left arrow. We assign it to the basic life amount. So again, census $basic life amount times 0.75. So again, we're taking advantage of this vectorization and referring to every single element with this one command, all these basic life amounts, by just saying census $basic life, multiply that by 0.75, and then store that in this new field called AD&D amount alt. So if we run that, control enter. So down here, it didn't really show us anything. It just repeated back the command. But if we look now at the census data frame, we see now we have this new field on here called AD&D amount alt, which shows us this new field, which everything is 0.75 of the basic life amount. And now we can use this vectorization again. Let's look at these new values that we created. Okay, here are all the new values we created. Now let's look at the new ratios that we created, and they're all 0.75, which is exactly what we would expect. And if we get the statistical summary of the new ratios we created, again, they're all 0.75. So this is just a confirmation of what we did, which is always good to do to make sure that you did it right when you do something like this. But you can see here what the power is of this vectorization concept, where you can refer to entire fields of data with just one command. So again, just to briefly review, we looked at a couple of things here today. One was how to access an amount or all of the values in a particular field on a data frame. In this case, it's the name of the data frame, census $AD&D amount. And then the second thing that we did was we created a new field by using that same naming convention, census $, create the new field name, we call it whatever we want, and then we assign it to whatever we wanted to assign it to. So in this case, we assigned it to the vector of basic life amounts times 0.75. So I hope you can appreciate the power of this and see how easy it is to use, and I hope you'll experiment with it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.